Welcome, everybody. I am Lori Cohen, the Executive Director of the Beagle Alliance. I am pleased again, as usual, to have an amazing guest here for our town halls, and I thank everybody for joining us. We have Dr. Stacy Lopresti-Goodman here, who is a professor of psychology, director for the School of Social and Behavioral Sciences at Marymount. She's been published in peer-reviewed journals, featured in major media outlets. And of course, I know, excuse me, that dogs in research have been a focus, especially in the last year in Canada and the United States. So she's going to talk a little bit about the trends in that. And so welcome, Stacy. So glad to have you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, Lori. I'm wearing my dog sweater in honor of the presentation. But thanks everybody for being here and joining us for the town hall. So I'm going to go ahead and share my presentation. So as Lori said, I'm a psychology professor at Marymount University. And for those of you in Canada, Marymount is located in Arlington, Virginia, which is right outside of Washington, D.C. I am going to be talking about trends in the use of dogs in experiments in the United States and Canada over the past few decades. And I will just warn you, some images can be upsetting, and I'm sorry, but that's just kind of the reality of the situation and what we're talking about. But before I start talking about trends in the use of dogs over the past few decades, I want to start by talking about one dog. And this dog's name was Pepper. And she was a Dalmatian who lived with a family in a farm in Pennsylvania, which is the state I was born and raised in. And unfortunately, in 1965, someone stole her from her home and sold her into medical research in New York City. So her family was looking for her for weeks, and by the time they figured out where she was, they had learned that she had been used in a terminal study and she had been killed. So Pepper's story was featured in a Life magazine story that same year. And so the story of what happened to her, as well as this Life magazine article, created a lot of public outrage. And so this public outrage actually led to the creation of a federal law in the United States, which now regulates the use of all dogs in laboratories. And that is called the Animal Welfare Act, or AWA for short. And so the Animal Welfare Act is the primary federal law that regulates the treatment of animals in research. However, it doesn't regulate all animals because 99% of animals who are used in labs are not covered. And the majority of animals in labs are mice, rats, and fish. And also the Animal Welfare Act really just dictates minimum standards of care. So it talks about the size of a cage an animal must be kept in, or it might regulate the temperature in a facility, whether or not they get veterinarian care, but really these are minimum standards. But dogs are protected along with cats, primates, rabbits, guinea pigs, gerbils, and other mammals. We don't have many dog nappers going around and taking dogs out of people's backyard anymore, thankfully. But unfortunately, the majority of dogs who are used in research come from dog breeding facilities. So these are images from Vigo, which is located in Virginia, which is where my university is located, Marymount. And so these are images from PETA, their undercover investigation, as well as an image from the New York Times. And so many of you have heard about Vigo, but the United States Department of Agriculture went in and they cited them for numerous violations of the law. These are just a few of the violations they uncovered. Their records showed that more than 300 puppies had died from unknown causes. They found more than 500 dogs who were experiencing discomfort, lethargy, or stress due to high temperatures. So the Animal Welfare Act says you have to maintain dogs in facilities that are under 85 degrees Fahrenheit. And here they had a broken air conditioning system, and these dogs were housed in a really hot facility, which caused severe distress. They found more than 50 dogs who had fight wounds, and they also found that food was withheld from more than a dozen dogs who were nursing 78 puppies. So this led to the Department of Justice coming in and shutting down in Vigo, and more than 4,000 dogs were rescued from the facility, including 5 of whom were rescued with the help of Lori and the Beagle Alliance. So thank you, Lori, for doing that. So we have a lot of dogs who come from dog breeding facilities, but we also have facilities in the United States that don't only breed dogs, but they also conduct research at those facilities. So right now there's a lot of attention on Ridgeland Farms, which is in the state of Wisconsin. And I will say that I did submit expert testimony in support of their cases to try and get these dogs out of there, as well as to get a special prosecutor who was appointed and did find a number of violations. So some of those violations included the fact that Ridgeland lacked veterinary treatment for their dogs. They didn't have standard health checks. They had non-veterinarians perform very painful surgeries without the use of analgesics or anything that would relieve the pain for those dogs. You can see the kind of conditions that they were housed in. And so there was a lot of injuries on these dogs' feet and legs because there were rusty old cages and their paws had fallen through and they had sores on their feet. And they didn't have proper ventilation and sanitation. So again, I watched hours of undercover footage from this facility. I'm going to show you a little bit of that as well. But there was just feces that was piled high. You could see wounds on the dog's feet. And it was really upsetting. So the special prosecutor was able to result in taking away the breeding license from Ridgeland, so they can no longer breed dogs. However, they are still able to conduct research at the facility. And there are more than 2,000 dogs that we know of who are still living at Ridgeland whose fate is unknown. Are they going to be sold to other research labs? Are they going to be killed? Are they going to be used in research at Ridgeland? We are unsure. So here is some of the footage from Ridgeland, and there is some sound, and it's just going to give you some insight into what it looks like inside of these facilities in case you've never seen anything like this. So you can see dogs.
Kelsey, keep walking. Let's walk by.
And so again, this was what Ridgeland looked like. So in addition to getting dogs for experiments and labs from breeding facilities, some dogs actually come from shelters. So in 2016, the National Institutes of Health, which is the largest funder of research in the United States, they also fund research abroad, including in Canada. But in 2016, the NIH stopped funding studies that use random sourced dogs. So these are dealers, individuals who might go around and find dogs and sell them to labs, or who might get dogs from shelters and sell them to labs. However, dogs can still come from shelters. The NIH still allows this. And there are only 18 states in the United States that have laws on the book that are against this, what we call pound seizure. There was a recent Faunalytics study that just came out that showed in Canada from 2021 to 2023, anywhere from 38 to 49% of all dogs used in Canadian labs were randomly sourced. So they came from shelters. Again, I live in the United States, so I don't know a lot about what's going on in Canada, but in the United States, the majority of dogs who are used in laboratories are beagles. Estimates are 95% or even more. And most of the research that dogs are used in includes disease research, pharmaceutical trials, toxicity testing, experimental surgeries, and sometimes even psychological experiments. Well, the United States Department of Agriculture, the USDA, started counting the number of dogs who were in US labs in 1973. So what I'm going to show you here are the number of dogs over the past 52 years who are in laboratories. So this does not include breeding facilities. This is purely laboratories. So at the bottom of your screen, the x-axis, you see the years from 1973 to 2024, the last year data was available. And on the left-hand side of your screen, or the y-axis, you see the number of dogs ranging from 0 to 250,000. And so the good news is that over the past 52 years, we've seen a decrease in the number of dogs in labs. There were more than 200,000 when they started tracking this. And in 2024, there were less than 50,000. But if you take a look at this graph also, you might see there were a lot of dogs used into the early 90s, and then there's this precipitous drop off. Well, there were some additional amendments made to the Animal Welfare Act in the mid 80s, which went into effect in the early 1990s, specifically regarding the way that you would house dogs in laboratories. So they said that social housing is preferred, but it's not required. Exercise is preferred unless there's some sort of exemption of why a dog can't be exercised. They also added specifications for the size of a crate or that a dog could be kept in, such that they could stand up and turn around, and that could be considered exercise. So it's possible that these additional regulations that were put into place in the early 90s are what have led to this decrease in the use of dogs over the past 40 years. However, we also know that there has been an increase in the number of animal species being used. So that includes mice and rats, but also an increase in pigs, who are more commonly being used as replacements for dogs in laboratories. This is a graphic that I'm borrowing from the Humane World for Animals. And what this map shows are the number of dogs in laboratories in the United States in 2024. And they've color coded for each state. So you can see that there are two states, Montana and Maine, who had no dogs in labs there. Green are lower numbers, and as you get up towards blue, that's where you can have anywhere from 2,000 or 9,000 plus animals. So Ridgeland, who we were talking about earlier, is in Wisconsin. And again, it's not just a breeding facility, it's also considered a laboratory. So you see them represented there in that color blue. They have around 2,200 dogs. Charles River, which is located in Massachusetts, has more than 9,000 dogs. And so that's why, they are the light blue. But again, this is only showing dogs in labs. This doesn't include dogs in breeding facility. In the state of New York, Marshall Farms is a notorious breeder. They have more than 17,000 dogs there alone. So that is not being represented in this map. Again, it's only the number of dogs in labs. So again, the last year that data was available on the USDA's website for dogs tells us that there are approximately 43,000 dogs in US labs. The United States Department of Agriculture also categorizes different pain level categories for dogs who are used in experimentation. There's something similar in Canada, which I'll talk about as well. But in 2024, there were more than 2,000 dogs being used in Category B research. Really, this means that they were held in laboratories, but they were not used in any active research protocols. Then you have Category C. So this is minimal or no pain or distress, and there were more than 27,000 dogs in this category. Next, you have Category D. This is where there is pain and distress involved in the procedures that they're being being forced upon them, but that pain is alleviated. And there were more than 12,000 dogs used in this category. And then there's Category E, where there is pain and distress being inflicted upon these dogs, and it is not being alleviated. And there were 400 dogs in that category. What's interesting about this is that categories B and C, those numbers have have not decreased over the past 50 years. So I showed you that chart on the last slide. We see a decrease. Those numbers have not declined over the past 50 years, but the number of dogs in the painful categories, D and E, have decreased. So this could be the result of other species being used in more painful experiments. However, this is self-reported. So let's say that one year I'm going to consider a protocol category D, and then the next year I'm like, actually, I think it's category C. There's minimal pain. So those numbers have been shifted around. And so it's also possible that just people have decided to start putting what used to be deemed painful experimentation into less painful categories. And that's why D and E numbers have gone down and B and C have remained relatively stable. Well, what about dogs in Canadian facilities? So this is data from the Canadian Council on Animal Care. So this is a private organization that oversees most publicly funded research in Canada. However, it's not an enforcing agency, and it does not oversee dogs who are used in privately funded research. I got this from a Faunalytics report that just came out a few weeks ago. And so this data is from 1985 to 2024. So this is 40 years of data. And what you see is that there are significantly fewer dogs in Canadian labs than in the United States, right? The previous graph started with over 200,000 and it went down to 40 something. So in Canada, it's been relatively stable around 12,000 dogs over the past 40 years. Yes, there's been a decrease from 2021, but again, if you imagine drawing a line straight through there to get the average, it's remained relatively stable. And again, Canada has its own pain categorization here. So in 2024, there were more than 9,000 dogs used in CCAC facilities. So Canada lists category B as research that involves little or no discomfort. And there were almost 6,000 dogs used in that category. They consider category C minor pain. There were 5,000 dogs used in that category. Category D is considered moderate pain. There was around 2,500 dogs used in that category. And then category E is severe pain, and there were 70 dogs used in that category. You don't have to be a math major to realize that these numbers add up to more than 9,252. And that's because this is not, dogs can be used in different categories of research. So you have individual dogs who are being counted multiple times here. So for both the Canadian and the United States categories of pain research, this categorization, they're talking about physical pain. They are not talking about psychological distress. I am a psychologist. My research focuses on the psychological suffering of not only dogs in labs, but also chimpanzees over here, and monkeys. And so it's really important that we think about how they're suffering mentally and emotionally, not just physically. And welfare science in the 70s up to the early 2000s really was worrying about freedom from pain, freedom from thirst. But animal welfare science is really progressing. And now we are much more concerned about, do animals in labs have any sort of positive well-being, positive emotional states? Do they have autonomy? Can they make decisions about what they want to do, whom they want to interact with or not? And I would argue that dogs in laboratories do not. And that's not being captured in these graphs. So what are some of the causes of psychological distress for dogs in laboratories? Well, a big one is housing. And so there are different housing conditions. So those 1985 amendments for dogs in the United States said social housing is preferred, but it is not required. So there are dogs who are singly housed in tiny cages, just a little bigger than the size of their body. This is an image from a hospital in London, Ontario. And here you see dogs, they're pair housed, and the cages are a little bit bigger, but still it's very impoverished, it lacks enrichment. It's just a big cage. At the bottom of your screen, these are two images that were taken from a study that was published in 2017. And these researchers were trying to understand how different laboratory environments affect the psychological and behavioral characteristics of dogs. And so in the bottom left, they show it, this is an image that showed standard housing. And in the right is what they called modern purpose-built housing for dogs. So here, dogs have access to one another in different rooms. They could see each other, but those doors can also be shut. And they found that, of course, the more rich environment, those animals displayed less abnormal behaviors than those in the more impoverished environments. And then here is an image from a pro-research website, which shows dogs who are socially housed with lots of enrichment. They've got toys, there's positive human social interaction. And, you know, this is what they would want you to think that all dogs in laboratories have. However, we know that that is not the case. And again, I should be clear, I'm not just talking about dogs in labs. I want to talk about those dogs in breeding facilities too, because we saw what Ridgeland looked like, and it looks nothing like that image in the bottom right-hand side of your screen. So this is an incredible source of distress for dogs being singly housed, lacking social interactions, living in these impoverished conditions. Also, you heard the video from inside Ridgeland. It is incredibly loud. Dogs' sense of hearing is actually more acute than ours. And so that constant presence of thousands and thousands of dogs barking all day and all night in those facilities, it's very stressful. It has a negative impact on brain development, brain functioning. It affects their immune system. Also, that bright, harsh lighting, not having access to regular day-night cycles, that negatively impacts them. The smell of feces, urine, the ammonia that comes off of that, dogs have even more sensitive sense of smell than humans do. So again, imagine just living in that filth day and night, being exposed to that. It's incredibly stressful. And while it is recommended that dogs have access to exercise and positive social interaction, we know that that's also not the case. And so all of this leads to psychological distress, and that can be seen through behavior. And so all of this prolonged stress results in generalized fear, anxiety, and abnormal behaviors. And I'm just going to show you a few abnormal behaviors here. So this is another video from inside Ridgeland, and this is a common abnormal behavior for dogs in labs, and it is circling. And again, dogs might just do this on end, nonstop. Another abnormal behavior or something that is exemplifying fear and anxiety is cowering, this hunched posture, leaning over, staring at the wall, right? This is fear. You see that. Excessive yawning is a sign of an abnormal behavior in dogs, as is excessive drooling and howling. So this isn't just a regular bark. It's like a long, low, deep howl. So why do these dogs do this? Well, there's a few different theories. Some think it's a way to self-soothe. So if you're so distressed and you're so upset and there's nothing comforting you, maybe this is one way that you could soothe yourself. And another hypothesis is that in the absence of cognitive enrichment, social enrichment, it's a way to stimulate when you're living in that small barren cage all by yourself. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess it depends on how you look at it, the majority of dogs in laboratories are killed. So they're either killed because that's the nature of the experiments that they're used for. They're killed so people can look at their tissues. It's for histology to try and understand, you know, the effects of the toxic substances that they ingested. And sometimes they're just killed because they don't have other plans in place for those dogs. But what happens to those dogs who are lucky enough to get out? Well, in the United States, we have adoption as option bills. They're often referred to as beagle freedom bills. They do not require that dogs are adopted out from laboratories. However, they just state that it can be an option if the dogs are healthy and they weren't used in terminal studies. So on this map, the dark blue states represent states where this has passed. The light blue states are where no law exists. However, there recently have been bills introduced in Wisconsin and in Indiana. And it also should be mentioned that there are some universities that have their own adoption policies. Well, in 2022, I actually published a paper comparing the psychological and behavioral characteristics of dogs who were retired or rescued from labs. And I compared them to dogs who had no known history of ever being in a lab, because we want these dogs out there. We want these dogs being adopted and rescued by, Beagle Alliance and Kindness Ranch, John Raymer doing amazing work. We want those dogs out there. And so I wanted to do research to show the public, or I guess understand and then show the public, that they can make great companions. And so what I did was I had a sample of 100 former laboratory beagles, and I compared the results about their psychological and behavioral characteristics to a sample of 244 pet beagles, so beagles who had never been used in a lab. And I didn't observe these dogs' behavior directly, but instead their caregivers completed what's called the Canine Behavioral Assessment and Research Questionnaire, or the CBARQ. And what it is 100 questions that the caregiver can fill out, and it yields scores on 36 different behaviors. And those 36 scores represent the intensity of a behavior being performed, so how intense is it, or how frequently that behavior is performed. So on the next slide, you're going to feel like you're back in school, because I'm going to show you a graph of these results, but I'm going to talk you through it, so bear with me. But on the bottom of your screen, the x-axis are those 36 different behavioral characteristics that were assessed. So you have things like trainability. Do they roll in their own feces? Do they beg for food? Do they chase their own tail? So those are the 36 categories on the bottom. And then on the y-axis, the left-hand side of your screen, that is a scale representing the intensity or frequency of a behavior. 0 indicating it's absent, 3 indicating it was really intense or it happened a lot. I'm going to show you bar graphs for each of these. And the beagles who were rescued from labs are going to be shown in blue. That's their bar. And the quote unquote pet beagles bars are going to be represented in orange. And so that's what you see here. Now, anytime you see 3 stars above those 2 bars, that indicates that there was a statistical difference found between the lab dogs and the pet dogs. So we're going to go through this by category. So first, we're going to look at aggressive behaviors, and that's represented in green. So in the bottom left-hand side of your screen, you see that there were only 2 aggressive behaviors where there was a difference between these 2 samples. And because the blue bar is lower than the orange bar, this means that the beagles rescued from labs had less aggression towards strangers, and they were less aggressive towards other dogs than the other beagles were. Next, we're looking at fear-related behaviors in purple. And here you see the opposite. You see those blue bars are larger than the orange bars. And that's because the beagles who were rescued from labs exhibited more fear-related behavior. So they were more fearful of strangers. They were fearful of non-social situations, new environments. They were really sensitive to touch. And so touch sensitivity was categorized as like going to the vet or being groomed, which you can imagine after being in a laboratory that, yes, they might be fearful of what's going to happen when some stranger touches them. But they also had increased attachment seeking behaviors with their adults, because that blue bar is higher there. So they saw the humans who rescued them as their saviors, and they really just were much more attached to them. But they also had increased fear of stairs. Again, which makes sense. If these dogs had lived their whole life in a cage, they had never seen stairs before, they wouldn't even understand how to navigate those. There was also a category for abnormal behaviors, and on the right-hand side of your screen, circled in red, the blue bar is higher, meaning the lab beagles did engage in more abnormal behaviors as a result of their time in the lab. And then in yellow are unwanted behaviors. And here you see that the beagles rescued from labs actually have a smaller bar than the pet beagles, meaning they engaged in less unwanted behaviors than the other beagles. They were less likely to chase after cars or chase after animals. They were less likely to try to run away from home or roam around the neighborhood, and they were less likely to roll in feces. So I found these differences between these two samples, and this represents about 30% of the behaviors, 1/3 of the categories assessed here. So the good news is that there were no differences on 70% of the behaviors assessed. So this shows that they make equally great companions, if not better, because they are less aggressive. They have increased attachment to their caregivers, and they perform less of those unwanted behavior than the other sample. So we do know that these lab dogs, former lab dogs, make great lap dogs. Well, what's some good news happening for dogs in the United States? If any of you were at the town hall last month, my husband, Justin Goodman, was talking about some of the great work that he's doing on behalf of dogs. And so one of his great accomplishments, his organization, White Coat Waste, is they got the Department of Veteran Affairs to eliminate all dog and cat research. They also got language in the 2026 National Defense Authorization Act, which prohibits the Department of Defense, DoD, from using dogs and cats in painful research, that category D and E research. As of last year, the National Institutes of Health, NIH, now allows researchers to use their grant funding at the end of their studies to actually use some of that money to rehome dogs who were not used in terminal studies. This is fantastic. In the past, grant money was only for supplies and people's salaries, and if there were dogs at the end of the study, you know, good luck. Now they can use their money to help with the cost of rehoming them. And last year, the NIH shut down its last in-house beagle lab. So again, they still fund the most use of dogs in the United States in other labs, but they shut down their last in-house beagle lab. And just a few weeks ago, the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, announced it will phase out all mammal use by 2035. And they currently require dogs to be used in pesticide testing. So that's a picture of me, Oliver, who was rescued from Inveigle. That's my husband, Justin Goodman. And that is the EPA Administrator, Lee Zeldin. And I was happy to be in the room when that announcement was made. Well, what about pending legislation for dogs? Well, Justin Goodman and White Coat Waste has also been, they've introduced a bill and they've been lobbying in support of a bill called the Preventing Animal Abuse and Waste Act, also known as the PAW Act, and that would ban NIH category D and E research for dogs. There's another bill that's been introduced. It's called the Protecting Dogs Subjected to Experiments Act. No cute acronym, just a long one, but that would prohibit all NIH-funded research on dogs. There's another law that's been introduced, and it's called the After Act, otherwise known as Violet's Law, and that is a picture of Violet on the right there. She was a hound who was rescued from a lab in Virginia, and this law is kind of like a Beagle Freedom Bill, but at the national level. It would require federal labs to have adoption as an option. And then in Canada, there is draft legislation in Ontario that would ban the breeding of dogs for research and would restrict the use of dogs in invasive medical research. So fingers crossed for all of that legislation. So the future for dogs in labs, well, again, good news. In the United States, we see that it's decreasing. And hopefully with all of this legislation that's been introduced, we could help that decrease happen sooner. I did some statistical analyses and modeling that showed that the use of dogs in labs in the US could end by 2036. But with this legislation, again, it's possible, could happen even sooner, fingers crossed. In Canada, you use fewer dogs than us, but you know, it's stable. So hopefully more legislation can be introduced. And we all need to work together, advocates, academics, rescue organizations, to do all that we can to get more dogs out of labs and into loving homes. And there's my picture of Lori getting some dog love herself. And so I just want to thank you for coming out and listening to me talk. And I want to thank the dogs who participated in my study. That's George Washington on the left. He was one of the many dogs. And on the right is a picture of me and Uno lobbying Capitol Hill. I gave a congressional briefing about the use of dogs 2 years ago. So we were walking the halls of Congress together, advocating on behalf of dogs. And then I have one more thing to say before I answer questions. I have been a professor at Marymount for the past 17 years. And so this is breaking news. This is the first time that I'm announcing this. Friday is going to be my last day as being a full professor of psychology, because starting March 9th, I will be moving over to the Animal Legal Defense Fund, and I'm going to be the director of animal law, education, and scholarship. But I will keep an academic affiliation with Marymount. But this is going to be my full-time job, working on behalf of animals and working to support people, future animal lawyers, law students, and animal lawyers who also want to help animals. So breaking news. There you go. So
Breaking
thank you.
news
Thanks,
and
everybody.
Congratulations. This is so exciting.
Thank
So
you.
so in other words, you're going to be on another town hall as that role.
Sure.
Yeah.
Happily.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. This is great. And I hope, well, we'll go through if anyone has questions, but wow, that was a lot of information.
I know,
And
sorry.
amazing. No, nothing to be sorry about.
Okay, good.
My gosh, I love that. I was taking screenshots. I don't know why. We record everything anyway, but you know what I find, well, I'll just make this comment, but given that the laboratories over the years have stated, and I think this is across the board in Canada and the US, that they can't release the dogs because they're not quote unquote fit for domestic life. I mean, really just in that study that you did proved otherwise. And that's just amazing to see, sort of in black and white or blue and green or whatever it is, but that's just incredible to see. And so there's really no excuse for not having an adoption program. And as much as we want to move towards non-animal methods, there's still all of those dogs that are in Canadian facilities and US facilities that still need to be rehomed or can possibly be rehomed. Yeah. That was amazing.
And so mine was the first study that compared the two groups of dogs, but there have been other studies that have just looked at dogs once they've been rehomed out of laboratories. And other researchers also show that these dogs make amazing companions, and that the longer that they're in people's homes, the more they engage in the typical preferred behaviors, and those abnormal behaviors kind of dissipate and go away. And so, yeah, there's lots of studies out there. I think, one of the things that people who work in labs might say is that there aren't policies in place for this to happen, right? So we do need policies in place. We need legislation in place that if there are dogs who are physically suitable to be adopted out, that they can be, and that there are processes in place.
I agree. It's true. And as we were talking about Wisconsin, and I'll just say that Jean just said anyone who meets any of these dogs would disagree. Of course, we all know how incredible these dogs are. I don't want to say we all know, but if you're blessed enough to have met even one dog out of research, you realize that they really do attach, and they just want to be cared for and give that love back. And they really do represent the most resilient creatures and the most forgiving creatures. And we see it, we're lucky to see it all the time. So in Wisconsin, we were just in Wisconsin with John Raymer and Kindness Ranch, talking about the bill. And it's funny because there was a little bit of controversy, because there's always, we all want to see an end to this, but there is a process to things, and we do have to focus on the animals sometimes, the animals that are there, and save as many lives as we can, who are in there in the laboratories currently. But interestingly enough, that was what one of the senators asked me, is he said, or he asked all of us, he said, do you think that the facilities will release dogs without legislation? And we said, well, no, historically, no. Well, actually, John had said historically, no. And then, of course, I chimed in about the Canadian position, which is obviously not, because we don't have any federal legislation in Canada, and we're not seeing dogs released. In general, we've heard of adoption programs. We've heard of some universities attempting to rehome the dogs to some of their staff. But for the most part, without legislation, they are legally okay to euthanize animals that could go on to live in and have a great life afterwards. So legislation is important.
It is important. And again, I'm guessing you have a waiting list, Lori, of people who would be willing to take dogs. I mean, look what happened with Vigo.
Yeah.
Those dogs got adopted like this, right?
Yeah.
So again, my research also focuses on primates. There are way too, people can't take primates into their homes, right? We know that. There's no place for these primates to go that if these labs were shut down, but that's not the case with dogs.
Yeah.
They are number one, America's favorite pet. People are willing to take them. People who have rescued a dog from a lab are willing to take another one or another one, tell their friends, their advocates. So there are homes out there, loving homes, who would love to take these dogs. Yeah, we just need policies in place to get them out.
I agree. And it's true. Yeah. And I think, and it's funny you mentioned as well. And if anyone, please, I don't want to do all the talking or the asking of questions. So, waiting for hands here, if anyone has any questions for Stacy. But again, it's not about the ending. And I think we always say that dogs will be the catalyst for change in animal testing, because they are the best friends of all of us in our culture. They are beloved family members and best friends in our community and in our culture. However, we have to also be aware that, and this is a big conversation in Canada right now, especially with that photo that you had from St. Joseph's Healthcare in London, is that, well, if they say they're going to stop testing on dogs, is it easy for them to say that, sort of make the story go away and then start testing on pigs instead, or just shifting that? What have you seen in that? What are your thoughts on that?
Again, the data shows that the number of animals in labs is increasing, right? We don't even count mice and rats, but the estimates out there show it's increasing. The number of pigs being used are increasing. So yes, it is unfortunate that even though dog and cat use is on the decline, the use of other species are going up.
So they'll appease the public.
If we can't even secure a win for, again, America's most beloved pet, like, there is no hope for these other animals who are in labs. And so we got to take a win for animals where we can get it. And then simultaneously, there are folks working on the new advanced methodology, used to be called non-animal methods. There are scientists working on these alternatives in conjunction with trying to stop these animals from being used and getting them out of labs. And I think we need every tool in the toolbox, because these animals need our help.
And indeed, dogs are the gateway.
Yeah.
Because there is not one human who has a dog or doesn't know of someone who's in love with their dog that can't relate to the fact that they are a family member. And at the very least, that's how we spread awareness about all of it. The use of animals, the ineffectiveness of treatments that are found in the animal use model, etc. All of the things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So anybody questions? And I
didn't get to see the comments before because I was chatting away. I don't know if there's anything in the comments or.
let's go through the comments.
Pound
we were
seizure in Winnipeg.
Yes.
Woohoo!
Yeah. So that ended, and it still is an issue in Ontario, but pretty much across Canada that ended. I did see that a lot when I worked in the United States, that was a major. I didn't realize when you had brought up that statistic, I didn't realize that it was that huge, but that's an incredible amount.
In Canada, you mean the number in Canada?
In the US.
Oh,
for a pound seizure from shelters.
that was a statistic from Canada.
Okay, can you go back to that, Stacy?
Yeah,
Maybe I read
sure.
that wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. Find it.
Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot with your slides.
Oh my gosh, no worries. That's what I'm here for. So the statistic was Canada.
Gosh, yes. Okay, that's just horrific.
Yep.
And that's something that we worked with. Well, I don't want to say we worked with. We had them on a town hall, and it's Animal Alliance of Canada, and they had, it's called Jesse's Project, and it was all about a dog coming out of a shelter, and just the horror of the fact that you could spend a week looking for your dog and not realize that your dog has been sold to a laboratory and is gone. So I just want to make note of this too, because for those of you who may not know, we do record all of these town halls. So if you missed anything or you came late, this town hall, we'll get it up in a couple of days. It'll be on our site under town halls. And Stacy's husband from White Coat Waste, Justin, who's here with us as well, we spoke with him on an incredible town hall in January, and that recording is up as well. And if you want to, if you're, obviously you don't have to be Canadian to want to know this, but as a Canadian, if you're interested about Animal Alliance, we had them on talking about pound seizure, and that town hall is a part of our recordings as well. So we like to have all those resources for you guys to go back on and be able to kind of get in the know of some of the issues and some of the people that we've chatted with over time. So I'm just going to go to the chat here, and oh, hi, Connie and Astro. I see I'm waving at you right now.
Oh my goodness, beautiful baby. Oh my goodness.
Oh, Linda was typing that this is shocking. I'm just going to see if my dogs are going to go crazy here.
I actually do have a question, Lori.
Go ahead, Connie. By all means.
Dr. Goodman, thank you so much for what you do, and congratulations on your new job. That is so exciting.
Thank you.
In looking at your in your chart, which was an amazing study of looking at beagles raised in labs and beagles not raised in labs, I was wondering about physical. If there's been any studies on lab dogs and the physical things that they go through, because with Astro, he had 2 grand mal seizures after we got him, and now he had one yesterday. And yeah, and I just wonder whether these dogs do have physical problems, maybe from the testing, which of course we can never know why, but if there's an increase with lab dogs with physical problems.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't have an answer to that. My inclination would be that if there were dogs used in incredibly harmful studies, they likely would be killed at the end or not adopted out. That's not to say that Astro didn't experience horrible things and that what he's experiencing now is a result of what happened to him in a laboratory. But yeah, I'm not sure of any scientific literature that actually looked at that, but it'd be something to look at. No, they want to be involved. I love it. Yes, I don't have an answer. I'm sorry, Connie, but okay. I can only imagine. I can only imagine that even those who are adopted out have some residual physical problems as well, depending on what they're used in.
Lori did say that Astro came from a very shut down group of dogs, so we don't know what experiments they had done. So I don't know if other of them in that group have had seizures. I don't know. But anyway, yeah.
No, that's a great question, Connie. And of course, it's always, and I apologize. My own beagle obviously sees something out there in the
Don't
world.
have to apologize.
Puppy,
They're part of
this
the
is why all the
conversation.
town halls are so casual, because it just is what it is, and we welcome everyone. Pop, she probably sees the horses running, and she just, yeah. No, Connie, actually, nobody else in that group has had a seizure, but that was one of the most shut down groups. And that was a rescue with Kindness Ranch back long time ago. Very shut down group. But again, over the years and the hundreds of dogs that I've been blessed to place into homes over the years, honestly, I have to say, I would have expected overall to have seen more physical issues than I've actually seen.
That's good.
Which is great. From, the laboratories never tell us what they've been doing. There's only been a couple that have said they've done flea and tick or something like that.
Right.
But for the most part, they're not sharing with anybody what they're testing, what kind of testing is going on. And I mean, years later, I still get photos and the dogs have turned 16 and 17 and 18. And so I have to say that I over the years, I've been really happily surprised that there's just been not as many medical issues as I would have thought about, which is really great in some magical way, because I would have thought there would have been more. So, and again, I'm sorry that of course Astro's having seizures, but
oh, he's still a healthy, happy dog.
He's still doing well. Exactly.
Very well.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
He's socializing with other dogs now, and he's it's taken him 2.5 years. But
yeah, it's been a long haul for him.
Been a long
for
time,
sure.
but it shows.
Yeah.
It shows that one dog may take longer than the other, but eventually they do get there.
Yeah, it proves their individuality. They're all different. Yeah.
All right.
And so, I'm talking about too, we don't know what type of research they were used in.
Exactly.
So people who do rescue them from facilities have to sign non-disclosure agreements. Their lab records don't come with them. And again, there are 43,000 dogs in labs, not even talking about breeding facilities. I mean, how many are actually getting out? Melanie Kaplan, who wrote Lab Dog, who you had a town hall with two weeks ago, in her book, she gives a statistic that Johns Hopkins University, when they were testifying against a bill, they reported that over a span of, I think it was 15 years, on average, they adopted out 6% of their dogs. It's in Melanie's book, but only 6% of their dogs. And that seems high, right? We know that not 6% of dogs nationwide are being adopted out, but so likely the ones being adopted out are ones who were used in non-invasive research and things that weren't too harmful, but we still see these residual effects of their times of not being socialized or not having adequate enrichment, that we see some of these abnormal behaviors and fear that persist for years after. And what you're saying, Connie, too, the average amount of time that the dogs rescued from labs in my study, they were out of labs, was about 2.5 years.
Oh,
and so there was this period of adjustment as well. I didn't want them to be right out of labs because everything would be new and novel. So they were on average 2.5 years out, but some of those other studies I mentioned too said a lot of these abnormal behaviors persist 4 years.
Yeah.
Even
that's
out.
what Lori has said.
Yeah.
When you adopt out dogs, Lori, she emphasizes that this is a process and it may take some time.
Yeah.
Oh, something else I'll say. So I talked about how these dogs have increased attachment to their caregivers. Another study found their caregivers have increased attachment to the dogs as well. And that 99% of individuals who've rescued dogs from labs said that they would rescue another dog from a lab again. So even though they need extra care, they need extra attention, care, and support, it's worth it.
That's
People know that.
fascinating. That is a really
is.
cool statistic. Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's work. I mean, beagles on a good day are work.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just one more comment, and then I'll take the camera off. But no, you're absolutely right, because this is our 5th rescue beagle, and I have loved every one of them. But this one, and I'm a nurse anyhow, but this one, there's something so special about him, and I'm extremely attached. I'm gonna cry.
Yeah.
So
Thank you, Connie. Thank you for giving him a second
yes.
chance at life. Thank you, Lori, for rescuing him.
Well,
Thank you,
Brenda,
Lauren.
Brenda and I were really lucky because we flew Astro to Toronto
Yeah,
and we got to meet Connie. That doesn't always happen, so that it was a pretty special thing that we got to fly him and meet Connie at the airport and bring them together.
right.
Yeah.
All right, I'll get off.
Thank
so
you,
that
Connie.
Other people can.
Thanks, Connie. Nice
Yes.
meeting you and Astro.
Yes, and thank you so much. I'll look forward to what you do in your future career here.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's very exciting. Does anyone else, we're hitting the hour. Well, we just hit the hour, which is usually people's threshold.
I know. Sorry, it was
Right.
heavy with the
No,
dense,
no, sorry, but just, I try to hit the hour because, everyone the hour is the max. But if anyone else has any questions, Debbie, you're typing, so I'm going to give you I'm going to watch you typing here. But I will just say, wow, that was an incredible amount of data and so informative. I mean, wow. Tell us what your next, I mean, aside from now you're moving into your next, this is a big phase. Like this is a big, yeah. So what are your hopes for this new position?
Well, the scholarship part of the title is newly added to that role. So I hope to keep doing this type of scholarship that helps educate people about the harms of animal experimentation, but also how resilient these animals can be. I want to foster other people doing this type of research and be a megaphone for them and get the word out there about there are better ways to do this science, better for humans, better for animals, and that even though there are laws there to protect animals, they don't actually protect animals, and so we need to enforce them. We need stronger laws, and that's what I'll be doing, just educating people about that. Students, yeah.
No, it's amazing because we have a humane education program we're working on, and we always say that the people coming up these are the future advocates, activists, lawyers, lawmakers, teachers, scientists, all of it. So now you get the opportunity to move these people in that direction. That's a blessed position.
Yeah, so I'm excited.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
Awesome. I cannot think of anybody better. Like it's perfect for you. I think it's amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you.
Yeah.
Debbie, thanks Beagle Alliance for organizing, and good luck. And Dr. Stacy on your new role. Debbie says,
thank you.
She gets emails from animal defense funds, so she'll be keeping an eye on you, she says. So
great, thank you.
Well, thank you so much again for coming. And of course, since I'm staring at Justin too on the screen, I'm going to thank you, Justin, because that was an incredible town hall a while back. And I just hope to see you guys in real person soon. And thank you all for coming. As usual, we will send you a link when this is recorded in case you want to watch it again, take some screenshots like I did, or share it with your friends. Please do. We love doing these town halls and just educating and having Q&As and chatting with our community. So thank you guys so much. We do not know what our next town hall is yet, but we will keep you posted. So
thank you, Lori, for everything that you do for animals, and thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Bye guys. Take care.
Thanks everybody. Bye-bye.